Describe to me the event of the 100 metres final.
32 years old. For most sprinters, that's the age when the finish line is already in sight. Muscles begin to slow, recovery takes longer, and younger rivals are expected to take over. By that point, many Olympic champions have already stepped away from the track, their greatest victories becoming memories rather than future possibilities. But on one unforgettable day, before a stadium packed with more than 80,000 spectators and millions watching around the world, one man calmly walked toward the starting blocks. He didn't smile. He didn't wave to the crowd. He simply knelt down, adjusted his starting position, and fixed his eyes on the finish line. The stadium fell almost silent. 8 of the fastest men on Earth waited for the gun, but all eyes were drawn to one athlete, whose confidence seemed almost intimidating. His expression never changed. His body language revealed nothing. To the world, he looked like a man without fear, cold, emotionless, and impossible to break. That man was Linford Christie. To millions of fans, Christie wasn't just another Olympic sprinter. He was Britain's sprint king, a symbol of power, discipline, and absolute confidence. Every race seemed like a statement. Every victory reinforced the belief that nothing could shake him. The cameras captured the medals. The headlines celebrated the records. The public admired the champion. But cameras only record what happens in front of them. They never show what happens after the stadium lights go out. Behind the confident stare was a man carrying pressures that few people could imagine. Every race came with enormous expectations. Every defeat was treated like a national disappointment. Every public appearance demanded that he remain the fearless champion the world expected to see. Over time, that image became more than a reputation. It became a mask. For nearly 4 decades, Linford Christie appeared to live 2 completely different lives. One belonged to the public, the fearless Olympic champion who never seemed to doubt himself. The other existed behind closed doors. A deeply private man dealing with criticism, controversy, relentless pressure, and the emotional cost of living under a microscope. It wasn't a double life built on deception. It was a life divided between public perception and private reality. While millions believed they knew exactly who Linford Christie was, very few ever saw the person beneath the medals, the man who fought battles that could never be measured with a stopwatch or displayed on a podium. This is not just the story of an Olympic champion. It's the story of the hidden weight of fame, the price of greatness, and the private struggles that remained invisible while the world applauded. This is the story of an athlete everyone recognized by name, but almost no one ever truly understood. This is the story of Linford Christie, a boy whose journey began thousands of miles away from the Olympic podium. At just 7 years old, he left the only home he had ever known in Jamaica to join his parents in Britain. What should have been a new beginning quickly became a harsh lesson in loneliness. Living in a new country, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, Christie struggled to fit in while dealing with prejudice and racism that would leave lasting emotional scars. Unlike most sprinting legends, Christie wasn't a teenage prodigy. While many future champions were already collecting medals in their early 20s, he was still searching for his path. He didn't fully commit to athletics until his mid-20s, an age when many elite sprinters are already approaching their peak. Critics dismissed him as too old to ever become a world-class athlete, but Christie refused to accept the limits others placed on him. His first taste of Olympic glory came at the 1988 Seoul Games. Crossing the line behind Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson, Christie initially settled for silver after Johnson was disqualified following a positive drug test. Although the medal was officially upgraded, the victory never carried the same emotional satisfaction as standing on the podium knowing you had crossed the finish line first. It was a moment of triumph clouded by controversy. 4 years later, Christie returned with something to prove. At the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, against younger rivals and overwhelming expectations, the 32-year-old stunned the world by winning the 100-meter Olympic gold medal, becoming the oldest Olympic champion in the event's history at the time. It was the defining moment of his career, a victory built on years of perseverance, discipline, and resilience. But success came with a price. As Christie's fame exploded, so did the media attention. Instead of focusing solely on his achievements, newspapers and television shows frequently turned his muscular physique into a source of jokes and sensational headlines. The constant scrutiny reminded him that fame could be just as unforgiving as defeat. Then came the chapter that would forever divide public opinion. In 1999, near the end of his competitive career, Christie tested positive for a banned substance. The case sparked intense debate, and although he consistently denied knowingly taking performance-enhancing drugs, the controversy cast a long shadow over one of Britain's greatest sporting careers. For many fans, questions about his legacy suddenly overshadowed decades of remarkable achievements. Rather than disappearing from the sport, Christie chose a different path. He dedicated himself to coaching, mentoring young athletes, and sharing the knowledge he had gained over a lifetime of competition. Yet behind his calm public image, the emotional weight of fame, criticism, and controversy remained largely unspoken. Only decades later, in a 2024 documentary, did Christie begin reflecting openly on the pressures that had shaped his life. And he spoke not just about winning races, but about the loneliness of success, the burden of constant judgment, and the emotional cost of spending years trying to appear unbreakable. This isn't simply the story of an Olympic champion. It's the story of a man who overcame extraordinary obstacles, reached the highest level of his sport, and spent much of his life carrying battles that the cheering crowds never saw. For nearly 40 years, the world believed it knew exactly who Linford Christie was. To millions, he was the man with the unshakable stare, the Olympic champion who never showed fear, never revealed doubt, and never seemed to crack under pressure. Every time he stepped onto the track, he projected complete confidence. The cameras captured a man who looked almost invincible, a champion whose strength appeared to go far beyond physical speed. But that image told only half the story. Behind the medals, the records, and the public applause was a very different reality. Christie carried emotional burdens that few people ever saw. The loneliness of leaving Jamaica as a child, the pain of growing up in an unfamiliar country while facing racism and prejudice, the relentless pressure to prove himself in a sport where many believed he had started too late, the weight of living under constant media scrutiny, where every success was celebrated, but every mistake threatened to define his entire career. As his fame grew, so did the expectations. The world expected him to be strong every day, confident in every interview, and unbeatable in every race. Admitting fear or vulnerability was never part of the image. Instead, Christie learned to keep his emotions hidden, protecting the private man behind the public champion. Then came the controversies that tested him in ways no race ever could. Public criticism, headlines questioning his reputation, and years of carrying the opprobriums. Emotional consequences of those moments became battles that unfolded far from the finish line. Yet, through it all, he rarely allowed the public to see how deeply those experiences affected him Looking back, the real double life wasn't one of deception. It was the enormous gap between how the world perceived Linford Christie and what he was quietly carrying inside. To the public, he was the fearless champion who could never be broken. In private, he was a man navigating pressure, loneliness, disappointment, and the personal cost of living beneath the spotlight for decades. For 40 years, one face belonged to the stadiums and television cameras. The other remained hidden behind a determined smile, waiting until much later in life for the world to finally understand the man behind the legend. By 1992, many people believed Linford Christie's best years were already behind him. At 32 years old, he was competing in an event dominated by younger sprinters. In the world of elite athletics, the 100 meters is often considered a young man's race. Speed is measured in fractions of a second, and even the slightest decline in explosiveness can mean the difference between standing on the podium and watching someone else celebrate. Critics questioned whether Christie had missed his chance. Some believed his silver medal from Seoul would be the closest he would ever come to Olympic glory. Others argued that age had finally caught up with him and that a new generation of sprinters was ready to take over. But Christie refused to accept the script that others had written for him. Instead of slowing down, he trained harder than ever. Every session became a battle against time itself. While younger rivals relied on raw speed, Christie leaned on experience, discipline, and an unshakable belief that his greatest race was still ahead of him. Then came the Barcelona Olympic Games. As he walked onto the track for the men's 100-meter final, there was little sign of emotion on his face. The crowd saw the same calm, intimidating competitor they had watched for years, but beneath that composed exterior was a man carrying the weight of enormous expectations. This wasn't just another race. It was the opportunity to silence every critic who believed he was too old to become Olympic champion. The starting gun fired. In less than 10 seconds, Christie produced the race of his life. Powerful from the blocks, smooth through the middle phase, and relentless to the finish. He crossed the line first, becoming Olympic champion and making history as the oldest man to win the Olympic 100-meter title at the time. It wasn't simply a gold medal. It was proof that determination could overcome doubt, that experience could defeat youth, and that greatness doesn't always follow the timeline people expect. For millions watching around the world, Linford Christie had done the impossible. At the very age when many believed his career should have been ending, he reached the highest point of it. The world expected retirement. Instead, it witnessed history. Long before he became an Olympic champion, Linford Christie experienced a heartbreak that would shape the rest of his life. At just 7 years old, he was forced to leave behind the only world he had ever known. Growing up in Courses, St. Andrew, Jamaica, Christie had been raised by his beloved grandmother, while his parents worked in Britain, hoping to build a better future for their family. To a young boy, Jamaica wasn't just home. It was where he felt safe, loved, and surrounded by familiar faces. Then, everything changed. One day, Christie had to say goodbye to his grandmother, pack up his childhood, and board a plane for a country he had never seen. Britain promised opportunity, but to a 7-year-old child, it felt like stepping into the unknown. He wasn't simply changing schools or moving to another neighborhood. He was leaving behind his family, his friends, his culture, and the comforting life he understood. Arriving in Britain was anything but easy. The weather was colder, the streets looked unfamiliar, and the sense of belonging he had always known suddenly disappeared.